They say justice doesn't bring back the dead, but it can bring a sliver of peace to the living. For Connie Bennett, the woman whose haunted face you see in that video, peace is a long time coming. 41 years ago, her world shattered when she discovered her son and his family brutally murdered in their Colorado home. And trust me when I say, it wasn't just horrifying, it was the kind of nightmare that keeps you awake at night. The killer didn't just stop at using a hammer to end his victims' lives. He went even further, committing unspeakable acts that shocked everyone who heard the details. At that time, forensic science wasn't what it is today, and for years his connection to the Bennett family murders and several other killings remained hidden. The truth only came to light when advances in technology finally exposed the full scope of his horrifying spree. So, who was this twisted murderer, and how did he go unnoticed for so long? Well, before we dive into his dark history, let's start by getting to know the victims first. Like any other family, the Bennett family was full of love, laughter, and big dreams. Bruce and Deborah Bennett, a young couple who got married in the 1970s, couldn't wait to start their life together. Bruce, born on April 22, 1956 in Denver, Colorado, had what you might call a normal childhood. Nothing too extraordinary, just a regular guy growing up with his two brothers, Richard and Daniel. But Deborah's story was a bit more complicated. As the oldest of four kids, she had to grow up fast after losing her mother at a young age. With her dad, Ernest, a war veteran, she became the caretaker for her younger siblings. Life was tough, but she kept her family together. Eventually, they moved to Colorado, and it was there that Deborah's brother, Larry, introduced her to Bruce. The two hit it off instantly, and before long, Bruce and Deborah were inseparable. They fell in love quickly and decided to start a family of their own. Later on, Bruce enlisted in the Navy, serving as a sonar analyst at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. It was a job that gave him the chance to work with some pretty high-tech equipment, and more importantly, provided the steady income he needed to support his growing family. So, in January of 1976, their first daughter, Melissa, was born, and they couldn't have been more thrilled. Then, 5 years later, in 1981, their second daughter, Vanessa, arrived. Their little family of four was complete. When Bruce wrapped up his service in the Navy, he had worked hard to create a more comfortable life for them. In 1983, with some help from their savings and a loan, they bought their first home in Aurora, Colorado. Life seemed perfect. The Bennetts were an ordinary, happy family. Bruce and Deborah worked hard to build a future together, balancing their lives between running the family's furniture distribution business and Bruce's studies to become an air traffic controller. Every day was filled with laughter, family dinners, and the joy of watching their daughters, Melissa and Vanessa, grow up in a safe, loving home. Life was good, and their future seemed bright. But just when everything felt perfect, an unspeakable horror shattered their world. It was Sunday, January 15th, 1984, a day meant for celebration. The Bennetts were hosting a pre-birthday gathering for Melissa, who was about to turn 8. Deborah had planned a school party for her daughter, but they decided to have an extra family celebration at home. The house was alive with laughter, the air filled with the sweet aroma of cake, and the warmth of loved ones surrounding them. As the evening wore on, Melissa's grandparents and uncles started saying their goodbyes. One of her uncles, noticing the garage door left open, casually reminded Bruce to close it before heading home. A simple remark, one that should have been insignificant, but that moment would mark the turning point in the Bennett's fate. The next morning, January 16, 1984, Bruce's mother, Constance Connie Bennett, received an unsettling call. The family's furniture store had reached out, concerned that Bruce and Deborah hadn't shown up for work. Repeated calls to the house went unanswered. A deep sense of dread settled in Connie's chest. Something was wrong. She decided to drive over to check on them. As she approached the house, an eerie sight greeted her. The garage door was still open, just as it had been the night before. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside. What she saw next would haunt her forever. Bruce's lifeless body lay crumpled at the foot of the stairs, his head battered beyond recognition, his throat slashed. Blood pooled around him, staining the once cozy home with unimaginable horror. Trembling, Connie rushed to a neighbor's house, barely able to choke out the words. "Call 911. Police and emergency responders arrived quickly, but the nightmare inside the Bennett home was far from over. Upstairs, in the master bedroom, they found Deborah, brutally beaten, her head savagely bludgeoned. The sight was horrific, but the worst was yet to come. In the children's bedroom, little Melissa lay motionless. She had been stabbed, her small body battered, her face covered with a blanket. The investigators' worst fears were confirmed. There were clear signs of sexual assault, a crime so vile, so inhuman, that even the most hardened officers struggled to contain their emotions. Then, amid the horror, a fragile thread of hope emerged. 3-year-old Vanessa, despite suffering severe injuries, was still alive. She was barely clinging to life. Her jaw shattered, her skull fractured, her tiny arms, hips, and legs broken. She, too, had been sexually assaulted. It was nothing short of a miracle that she was breathing at all. Rushed to the hospital, she needed multiple blood transfusions, urgent medical intervention, just to keep her stable. Her survival was uncertain, but she was fighting. While doctors worked desperately to save Vanessa, investigators combed through the Bennett home, piecing together the gruesome puzzle. Outside in the snow, they found Deborah's purse emptied, rifled through by the intruder. Nearby, a butcher knife from the family's kitchen lay discarded. But the real weapon, the one used to bludgeon Bruce, Deborah, and Melissa, was nowhere to be found. Then, they discovered a chilling clue. Blood-stained boot prints. Footprints that didn't belong to anyone in the family. The realization sent a shudder through the investigative team. The person who did this was a stranger. Someone who had no business being inside that home. Authorities wasted no time. Family members and friends who had attended Melissa's birthday party were asked to provide DNA samples. Though genetic testing was still in its infancy, investigators knew they needed to preserve every shred of evidence. They meticulously collected blood samples, fibers from the carpet beneath Melissa's body, bedspreads, clothing, anything that might one day unmask the monster behind this atrocity. But as the investigation deepened, a chilling realization struck. This wasn't an isolated attack. Just days earlier, on January 4th, 1984 in Aurora, Colorado, another family had been ambushed in their home. James and Kimberly were enjoying a quiet evening. James recording music in another room, while Kimberly relaxed in bed, when a shadowy figure crept inside. Out of nowhere, Kimberly was struck in the head. She caught a brief glimpse of a dark silhouette before she screamed, sending the attacker fleeing. But he had already done damage. James rushed to her side, only to be struck in the head himself. Despite his injuries, he chased the attacker, but the man vanished into the night. Police arrived to find a disturbing scene. Fresh footprints in the snow, a hammer left behind, and Kimberly's purse discarded outside, missing only its cash. The case sent shockwaves through the community, but no one could have imagined that, just days later, the Bennett family would meet a far worse fate. Then, before authorities could catch their breath, another horrifying attack shook Colorado. On January 10th, 1984, Patricia Smith, a 50-year-old interior decorator, was brutally murdered in her home. Like the Bennetts, she was struck repeatedly in the head with a hammer. Her body, left in a grotesque state. The pattern was undeniable. Someone was hunting, striking without warning, leaving a trail of blood and devastation in his wake. The once peaceful neighborhoods of Colorado were now gripped with fear. Was this the work of a deranged serial killer? Would he strike again? And most importantly, would they be able to catch him before another innocent family suffered the same fate? What had started as a joyful birthday celebration had turned into a nightmare, and the search of the truth was just beginning. January 10th, 1984, began like any other day for Patricia. The crisp winter air carried the sounds of morning routines, coffee brewing, children laughing, buses rolling into the station. She took her daughter to the park so she could catch the bus to work, then dropped off her grandkids at daycare before heading to work herself. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. At lunchtime, Patricia grabbed a quick hamburger, picked up some laundry, and finally returned home. The house was quiet, welcoming. She went up to her bedroom, turned on the TV, and settled in, until, for reasons unknown, she decided to head back downstairs. That's when she came face to face with a nightmare. A shadow loomed in the dim light of her living room. Before she could scream, before she could even react, a savage attack unfolded. The blows rained down with merciless force, the brutality beyond comprehension. In mere seconds, Patricia's life was stolen from her. Her home, transformed into a crime scene, drenched in horror. Hours passed. Patricia's daughter, waiting at the park for her mother to pick her up, grew increasingly anxious. She dialed home from a public phone. No answer. Something felt wrong. Panic set in. She reached out to a cousin, who rushed to pick her up along with the children. As they approached the house, dread filled the air. The garage door wide open. Inside, the television flickered in the darkness, casting eerie shadows. And then the unthinkable. Stepping inside, they stumbled upon a scene so gruesome, it was almost impossible to process. Patricia lay lifeless in the living room, her body partially covered by a child's blanket. Blood pooled around her, her pants and boots scattered, her upper clothing torn open, a horrifying indication of another unspeakable crime. Beside her, a hammer, the murder weapon. A scream pierced the silence. Patricia's daughter ran to a neighbor's house, desperate for hope, for someone to tell her that this was all a mistake, that her mother was still alive. But reality was far crueler. Patricia was gone. 911 was called. Police arrived, their faces grim as they surveyed the horror before them. The investigation uncovered something truly terrifying. Patricia had suffered 17 brutal hammer blows to the head. The killer had ransacked her purse, stolen money, and vanished into the night. No clear suspects emerged. But then, another attack shattered the illusion of safety. That very evening, January 10th, another woman was targeted. Her name was Donna, a flight attendant for Frontier Airlines. She had been waiting for her partner, Ron, a pilot, to return from a night flight. Her evening was routine: picking up groceries, checking the mail, parking her car in the garage. Nothing seemed unusual. Then, a sudden force. A hammer strike to the temple. Darkness consumed her. The next morning, Ron arrived home and found something that turned his blood to ice. A trail of blood leading from the garage to the house. He rushed inside, following the crimson path to the bedroom. There, sprawled across the bed, was Donna, unconscious, but miraculously alive. Blood matted her hair, her face pale from trauma. Ron's frantic call to 911 brought paramedics racing to the scene. Doctors confirmed what he had feared. Donna had been attacked and assaulted, her injuries severe, her memory fractured. She couldn't recall the attack, a cruel blessing in disguise. Investigators first suspected Ron. The timeline was too close. But as alibis checked out, it became clear someone else was hunting in the night. A blood-soaked hammer, found in Donna's car, offered a chilling connection to Patricia's murder. But the evidence was frustratingly elusive. No fingerprints, no clear leads, and the terror wasn't over. 6 days later, less than 25 miles away, horror struck again. The Bennett family, found slaughtered in their home. The sheer brutality of the crime shook the community to its core. As forensic teams scoured the scenes of these attacks, one thing became evident. The hammer killer was still out there, watching, waiting, choosing his next victim. Authorities, desperate to stop the monster in their midst, pieced together every fragment of evidence: genetic material, footprints, stolen items, all studied meticulously. But this was the 1980s. Forensic science was still in its infancy. DNA analysis primitive. The killer remained a ghost. The FBI brought in a profiler, hoping to understand the predator's mind. The assessment? Chilling. This was an opportunistic killer, a man who didn't target specific victims, but instead prowled neighborhoods, looking for weaknesses. An open garage door, an unlocked window. Once inside, his attacks were swift, vicious, and without mercy. The profiler painted a picture: a young man, around 20, intelligent but lacking formal education, moving through the city unseen, his rage manifesting in bloodied hammer strikes. But even with this knowledge, he was nowhere to be found. Throughout that heartbreaking January, families grieved, survivors fought for their lives, and authorities waged a desperate war against the unknown. Little Vanessa Bennett, barely clinging to life after the attack on her family, became a symbol of resilience. Her grandmother, Connie, never gave up hope, praying for a miracle. And as the days passed, one question haunted everyone: when would the hammer killer strike again? Because until he was caught, no one was safe. Right something? He might have finished high school, but never made it to college. A rough upbringing, a troubled path. These were the whispers in the shadows of an unknown man. The repeated use of hammers and a distinctive boot print at multiple crime scenes suggested that he might be working in construction. It made sense. Many homes were being built in the areas where the crimes occurred. But here's the real kicker. The profiler believed this man wouldn't stop until he was caught. Determined to track him down, investigators combed through construction sites, talked to contractors, and sought anyone who had noticed something off. But the records were a mess, a tangle of missing names and incomplete logs. The attacks were always sudden, always under the cover of darkness. No one had seen the attacker clearly. And just like that, the case was slipping through their fingers. As the investigation dragged on with no new leads, fear gripped the community. Doors were locked tighter than ever. Some residents bought guns. Others, in a desperate attempt to feel safe, even wore helmets to bed. The nightmare had everyone on edge. But then nothing. The attack stopped. Months passed. Then years. The police had no choice but to move on, leaving these brutal crimes unsolved. Then in 1990, investigators stumbled upon a lone clue: one single blonde pubic hair. It was immediately sent for forensic analysis, a glimmer of hope in a case long gone cold. But the technology of the time wasn't advanced enough. The test destroyed the hair before any useful information could be extracted. A crushing setback. Still, the investigators refused to give up. Fast forward to 2001, 17 years after the brutal attacks. A breakthrough. DNA samples were finally identified, clearing family members from suspicion. It was progress, but still, the identity of the killer remained a mystery. Then came 2018, and with it, a new lead. This time, detectives teamed up with a genealogist, hoping she could do what decades of police work couldn't. They used the DNA sequence to search both public and private databases. Just 1 week later, the genealogist found a match. A last name, Ewing. A huge discovery. But it wasn't the end of the road. There were several individuals with the surname Ewing living in Colorado, yet none of them fit the profile. The detectives wouldn't let this slip away. Expanding their search, they combed through Aurora's records and identified a total of 40 individuals with that surname. Juggling other cases, they meticulously analyzed each one, clinging to the hope that they were closing in on their suspect. Then, in July 2018, everything clicked. After months of relentless work, they found a match. An inmate in Nevada, Alex Ewing. Born on August 14, 1960, in North Carolina, Lou was known about his early years. What was clear was his troubled past. He had dropped out of school after the 10th grade, claiming he had been expelled for excessive drinking. From there, his life spiraled into crime. As a juvenile, Alex was detained in Sacramento for theft. He was placed in a foster home, but stayed for only 2 weeks before being released. His criminal activities escalated: burglary, theft, escape, leaving a trail of crimes across California, Arizona, and Florida. By 1983, he had secured a driver's license and was living in Denver, Colorado. Early 1984, a wave of terror swept through Denver. 4 people dead, several others severely injured, and then silence. The attack stopped. Alex Ewing had disappeared, but he hadn't gone far. January 27, 1984, Kingman, Arizona. He struck again. This time, he broke into a home and brutally attacked Roy Williams with a heavy granite rock, striking him in the head and chest. Miraculously, Roy survived. Barely. He required over 100 stitches. Later that day, a police officer spotted a man hiding in the bushes near an interstate on-ramp. When approached, the man ran. A short, intense chase ensued, but the suspect vanished into the night. February 2nd, 1984. Alex Ewing was finally caught. Charged with attempted first-degree murder and first-degree robbery, he was held in jail in Utah. But Alex wasn't done shocking the world. In August 1984, during a routine inmate transport, Alex made a daring escape. At a service station stop, he managed to slip away. It was 10 p.m. when the first call came in. A man in red shorts, running through a neighborhood. Panic spread like wildfire. Then, the unthinkable happened. Nancy Berry dialed 911. Her voice, trembling with terror. She and her husband had been attacked in their bed. Alex had broken into their home through an open garage door and savagely beaten them with an axe handle. Miraculously, their children were unharmed. A massive manhunt was underway. 4 days later, he was spotted at a phone booth, desperately calling his brother for help. He tried to run, but exhaustion and dehydration slowed him down. The chase was over. The police had him. This time, there would be no escape. Charged with attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, robbery, and escape, Alex was sentenced to 110 years in prison. But the story wasn't over yet. For more than 3 decades, the true extent of his crimes remained hidden. Until July 2018, a team of Colorado police and prosecutors traveled to the Northern Nevada Correctional Center. They needed to hear it from him, face to face. But they didn't come as law enforcement. They played their cards carefully, posing as non-law enforcement personnel. The key evidence? A DNA match from the brutal Bennett and Patricia crime scenes. The hunt for justice had finally come full circle. And this time, there would be no escape for Alex Ewing. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The break in the case that had eluded them for decades. But they had to play it smart. During the interview, Alex spoke candidly about his past. He claimed his father had served in the Air Force and recounted a troubled history, revealing that he had nearly died from spinal meningitis as a child. The illness, he said, changed him forever. He also admitted to working in construction in Colorado, particularly in Aurora and Lakewood, before leaving because of the unbearable cold. That single detail sent a jolt through the detectives. It placed Alex in Colorado at the time of the gruesome attacks. The next day, detectives returned, this time armed with something far more chilling: evidence. They laid out 6 black and white photos of the crime scenes in Colorado before Alex. He denied knowing any of the victims. But then, the detectives presented a color photograph of Patricia, alive and smiling. Alex barely reacted. Then came the real test: a color photo of Patricia's lifeless body. The moment Alex's eyes met the image, his demeanor shifted. His breath grew heavy. His hands clenched. He insisted there must be some mistake. Panic washed over him. He immediately demanded a lawyer. For years, Alex had lived under the illusion that he was safe, that his past would never catch up to him. After spending 34 years behind bars, he was preparing to request parole, believing he had a chance at freedom. He had even set up a profile on a dating site, fully expecting a second chance at life. But the walls were closing in. The detectives now had what they needed. A DNA match confirmed it. Alex had been at the crime scenes. With this undeniable evidence, Colorado authorities secured a court order for another cheek swab. The results shattered any lingering doubts. The DNA from the Bennett family and Patricia's crime scenes were an exact match. Justice was finally within reach. Police began making the long-awaited phone calls to the families of the 1984 victims. The man responsible had been found. Relief mixed with sorrow. The wounds were still fresh, even after all these years. The next step was Alex's extradition from Nevada to Colorado for trial. On October 2nd, 2018, the first hearing took place. Alex sat before the judge stone-faced, as he was informed that he would be sent to Colorado to face the charges. But he wasn't going down without a fight. He vowed to contest the extradition. Over the next 16 months, his lawyer filed appeal after appeal, desperate to stall the inevitable. But the prosecutors held firm. Some of the attacks had passed the statute of limitations, but the murder charges stood strong. Finally, in February 2020, the Nevada Supreme Court ordered Alex's transfer to Colorado. His legal team fought to block the move, but the U.S. Supreme Court shut them down. A few days later, Alex was shackled and escorted onto a plane bound for Colorado. The trial for the Bennett family murders began in July 2021. The prosecution built an airtight case, presenting damning DNA evidence that tied Alex to the crime scenes. The similarities between the Bennett and Patricia murders were chilling. Both victims were bludgeoned with a hammer, sexually assaulted, and left in disturbing positions. In both cases, the attacker had entered through open garages, and purses were found near the bodies. The defense scrambled to create doubt, arguing that the DNA samples could have been mishandled, that there were no fingerprints linking Alex to the crimes. But the prosecution countered. Alex had likely worn gloves. The most gut-wrenching testimony came from Connie Bennett, Bruce's mother. She took the stand and described the horrific moment she discovered the crime scene inside her son's home. As she spoke, the jury was shown haunting photographs of the aftermath. After 3.5 hours of deliberation, the jury sent a note to the judge. They were deadlocked. The prosecution urged the judge to keep them deliberating. The defense pushed for a mistrial. The judge refused. The jury would return the next day. 6 hours later, they reached a verdict: guilty on all counts. Alex was convicted of 3 counts of murder, robbery, and additional charges. At sentencing, the victims' families spoke of their decades of pain, their lives shattered by a man who showed no remorse. When asked if he had anything to say, Alex simply muttered, "No, thank you." The judge, disgusted by his actions, sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms. No parole, no hope, no escape. But the fight wasn't over yet. The trial for Patricia's murder began in October 2021, only to be halted when Alex's defense requested a mental competency evaluation. The test confirmed what the court already suspected. Alex was fit to stand trial. After further delays, the trial resumed in April 2022. This time, Alex couldn't stay silent. He ranted about being extradited from Nevada, claiming the system was rigged against him. His outburst did nothing to save him. Another guilty verdict. Another life sentence. For Vanessa, the lone survivor of the Bennett family, it was both a victory and a reminder of the nightmare that haunted her every waking moment. The attack had left her with scars, physical and emotional. For years, she battled addiction, depression, and the weight of her past. But she refused to remain a victim. Vanessa rebuilt her life. She got clean. She found hope. But even as the man who destroyed her family was locked away forever, she admitted, it doesn't bring peace. The damage is done. In the end, justice had been served, but at a cost no one should have to bear. While the verdict couldn't bring back the lives lost, it ensured one thing: Alex Ewing would never hurt another soul again. This was today's true story. Our aim is for people to learn from such incidents and strive to improve society. If you like the way we create these videos, and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.